Elliot Grayson heard the laugh first, thin as glass, and it stopped him mid-step. He stood in the upstairs hallway of the Bellevue house he'd bought to feel safe, one hand braced on the doorframe, afraid his body would make noise. The corridor lights were dim. The air smelled like rain and lemon polish. Inside Maribel's room, a record player hummed low, old soul music, warm and slow. And then came a voice he hadn't heard in 14 days. "I forgot how my voice feels," Maribel said. Elliot's stomach dropped. He leaned just enough to see. His 8-year-old daughter sat cross-legged on the rug, her pajama sleeves pushed up, a paper star cupped between her fingers. Across from her knelt Nyla Reed, the new maid, her posture easy, like she'd been there for years instead of 3 days. Nyla didn't look at Elliot. She didn't rush. She simply held Maribel's hands the way you hold something fragile, not to control it, just to keep it from falling. "Your voice still belongs to you," Nyla whispered. "You don't have to use it loud." Maribel's lips trembled, like the words hurt to push out. "What if I say it and it's gone again?" she asked. Elliot felt tears rise fast, embarrassing and hot. He'd paid doctors in Manhattan. He'd flown in a child trauma team from Palo Alto. He'd offered bribes to God in the quiet of his office. None of it had done what this woman was doing on his carpet. Nyla nodded once, slow. "Then we whisper first," she said, and slid another folded star into Maribel's palm. "Just a little. Just for today." Maribel inhaled, eyes squeezed shut. "Daddy?" she called, barely louder than a breath. Elliot's knees hit the floor before his mind caught up. He didn't even try. 2 weeks earlier the house had sounded different. Not music. Not laughter. Just rain. Elliot remembered the way it came down that night. Hard on the windshield, hard on the trees along Lake Washington Boulevard, hard on his nerves. Maribel sat in the back seat, humming, feet swinging in her booster like the world was still normal. His wife, Celeste, sat in the passenger seat, scrolling her phone and talking about groceries. They pulled into the driveway. The security gate slid shut behind them. Celeste said she'd run inside for Maribel's purple umbrella, the one with the little ducks. "I'll be right back," she promised. Maribel opened her mouth to answer, and stopped. Elliot noticed, but he let it go. Kids get quiet. He glanced down at his phone out of habit, letting a notification steal 2 seconds of his attention. Then the sound came. A scream from outside. A thud that didn't belong in their world. Tires spinning, then tearing away into the dark. Elliot threw his door open and ran onto wet concrete, slipping, shouting Celeste's name until his throat burned. The driveway lights caught her on the ground, hair plastered to her face, one hand stretched toward the door like she tried to crawl home. Maribel climbed out behind him, silent. An ambulance arrived. Police arrived. Neighbors gathered in bathrobes like ghosts. Elliot watched his daughter's eyes track every flashing light, every stranger's mouth moving, every adult trying to sound calm. "Mommy?" Maribel whispered at last. But the next morning, when Elliot asked her to say it again, she stared at him like the word belonged to another life. And after that, she didn't speak at all to anyone. If you've ever gone quiet after something you didn't understand, or watched someone you loved disappear into silence, you know how heavy that moment feels. Share in the comments what silence once meant to you. After the funeral, the house stopped sounding like a home. It was too big for 3 people and then suddenly too big for 2. The ceiling swallowed footsteps. Hallways echoed even when no one was walking. Elliot Grayson had bought the Bellevue mansion years earlier because it looked solid. Glass, stone, views of the water that made guests go quiet. Now it felt hollow, like it was holding its breath. Maribel drifted through it like a shadow. She ate when food was placed in front of her. She slept when exhaustion won. She followed instructions without resistance, without questions, without sound. Elliot watched her from a distance, terrified of pushing too hard, equally terrified of not pushing enough. Every silence felt like a verdict on his failure as a father. He filled the days with structure, schedules, charts, morning routines taped to the fridge in neat handwriting Celeste would have liked. None of it reached Maribel. She moved through it all as if underwater. At night, Elliot sat alone in his study, staring at city lights reflected on glass, replaying the same moment over and over. The glance at his phone. The seconds he couldn't get back. He wondered if Maribel remembered that part. He wondered if she blamed him. Sometimes he stood outside her bedroom door, listening for any sound at all. A cough. A sigh. A cry. Nothing. The quiet pressed in, thick and accusing. And in that quiet, Elliot began to fear something worse than grief. He feared his daughter wasn't just silent. He feared she was disappearing. The experts arrived with confidence and left with paperwork. A child psychologist from Manhattan spoke gently and nodded often. A trauma specialist from Palo Alto explained timelines and triggers using diagrams. A speech therapist laid out milestones and expectations in a calm, rehearsed voice. They all said the same thing in different ways. Selective mutism. Acute trauma response. Temporary with the right support. Elliot clung to the word temporary like a life raft. He rearranged his schedule. Cleared board meetings. Took calls from his office at home so Maribel could see him nearby. He sat in therapy rooms and watched strangers ask his daughter questions she didn't answer. He watched them praise her silence as progress, tell him not to rush her, not to panic. But he was panicking. Each session ended the same way, Maribel coloring quietly, eyes lowered, professionals whispering reassurance as if volume was the problem. Elliot nodded, signed checks, thanked them politely. After they left, the house fell back into its heavy stillness. One doctor suggested medication. Another suggested a residential program. A third warned Elliot that his presence might be too emotionally charged. That one hurt the most. Late one night, Elliot found himself watching an interview of his own on a financial network, recorded days earlier. He looked older, smaller. At the end, when the anchor asked how his family was coping, Elliot paused too long before answering. "I don't know how to help my daughter," he admitted. "I'd trade everything I own to hear her voice again." The clip went viral. 3 days later, Nyla Reed arrived at the front gate with a small suitcase and no expectations. And somehow, that was when everything began to change. Nyla Reed didn't look like anyone Elliot Grayson had interviewed before. She wore simple clothes, flat shoes, her hair pulled back without effort. No nerves. No eagerness. When the gate security called up to confirm her arrival, Elliot almost said no. He was tired of strangers entering the house with solutions. But something in her stillness made him pause. She introduced herself quietly, her voice steady, eyes warm but not intrusive. She didn't comment on the house, the view, or his name. She didn't offer condolences unless prompted. When Elliot explained Maribel's condition, Nyla listened without interrupting, without pity flashing across her face. "I understand," she said simply. That was it. No advice. No reassurance. Just understanding. Elliot noticed the way Maribel glanced at Nyla from behind the staircase railing, curious but unafraid. Most adults tried too hard, smiling, crouching, talking slowly. Nyla didn't approach her at all. She set down her bag, asked where to store cleaning supplies, and went to work as if Maribel were just another quiet presence in the house. That unsettled Elliot more than comfort ever could. Over the next 2 days, Nyla cleaned with precision, humming softly to herself, never entering Maribel's room unless invited. She left small changes behind, fresh air, softer lighting, a different rhythm to the space. Elliot told himself it meant nothing. Until the third morning. He passed Maribel's room and noticed something new on the nightstand. A small wooden box he didn't recognize. Smooth. Hand-carved. Out of place. Elliot felt irritation rise sharp and sudden. He hadn't authorized that. And yet, when he reached for the box, Maribel's hand slid over it protectively. It was the first time she'd moved that fast in days. Elliot confronted Nyla that afternoon in the kitchen. His tone was controlled, polite, the way he spoke in boardrooms when someone crossed a line. "I don't like things being added to my daughter's space without my approval," he said. "Especially personal items." Nyla didn't argue. She dried her hands slowly on a towel, then met his eyes. "I understand," she said. "If you want it gone, I'll remove it." The calm in her voice disarmed him. No defensiveness. No apology soaked in fear of losing the job. "What is it?" Elliot asked. "A listening box," Nyla replied. That only deepened his frustration. "That's not appropriate." Nyla nodded once. "Then I won't explain it to you," she said gently. "Only to her if she asks." Elliot almost fired her on the spot. But that evening he noticed something else. Maribel had pulled the box closer to her pillow. She hadn't opened it. She hadn't smiled. But she touched it often, like it anchored her. Later, Elliot watched from the hallway as Nyla entered Maribel's room with permission. 2 soft knocks, a pause. She didn't speak. She sat on the floor and folded paper slowly, deliberately, matching Maribel's breathing without comment. No questions. No pressure. Just presence. Elliot felt something unfamiliar twist in his chest. It wasn't hope. It was fear. Fear that this woman, this stranger, might reach places he couldn't. Fear that if it worked, he'd have to admit how little his power mattered here. And fear that if it failed, he'd let Maribel down all over again. From the doorway, Maribel watched Nyla's hands fold paper into something small and careful. And for the first time since the accident, she leaned forward. Nyla never asked Maribel a single question. That was what Elliot noticed first. She didn't ask how she felt. Didn't ask what she remembered. Didn't ask her to try just once to say a word. Instead, Nyla treated silence like a language that already existed. Every afternoon, she brought something small into the room. A record with soft crackles and slow bass lines. Paper cut into neat squares. A metronome she set so low it barely clicked. She sat on the floor, always at Maribel's level, and began. Fold. Pause. Breathe. Maribel watched closely. Her eyes followed Nyla's hands as they moved with intention, never rushing, never correcting mistakes. When the music played, Nyla tapped gently on the floor, not to lead but to keep time. Sometimes she closed her eyes as if listening to something Maribel couldn't hear yet. Elliot watched from the hallway, arms crossed, heart tight. He didn't understand what he was seeing. It looked like nothing. No exercises. No goals. No measurable progress. And yet Maribel stayed. She didn't retreat to her bed. She didn't shut down. She leaned in inch by inch, her breathing slowly matching Nyla's. When Nyla stopped folding, Maribel reached for the paper herself. Her fingers shook at first, then steadied. Nyla smiled then, not wide, not triumphant. Just enough to say, "I see you." Later that evening, Elliot found Maribel humming in the bath. Not a tune. Just sound. Low and uneven, like she was testing the shape of it. When he froze in the doorway, afraid to interrupt, Maribel didn't stop. For the first time since the accident, silence wasn't swallowing her whole. It was loosening its grip. By the 4th day, the floor of Maribel's room was covered in paper stars. Some were neat. Others were crooked, folded too fast or too tight. Nyla didn't correct any of them. She placed each one gently into a shallow bowl as if they all mattered the same. Elliot noticed the change in small ways. Maribel began sleeping through the night. She stopped flinching at sudden sounds. She made eye contact, brief, cautious, but real. Once, when Elliot reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. That almost undid him. One afternoon, Nyla introduced breathing without explanation. She inhaled slowly, exaggerated just enough to be seen. Then she exhaled, shoulders dropping. She didn't look at Maribel while she did it. Maribel watched anyway. She copied her. One breath. Then another. The third caught in her chest, sharp and shaky. Nyla didn't react. She waited. When Maribel exhaled, the sound came with it, a broken little sob that surprised them both. Nyla reached out but didn't touch her. "It's okay," she said softly. "You don't have to hold it anymore." Maribel pressed her hands flat against the floor, grounding herself the way Nyla had shown her. The sob faded. Her breathing slowed. Afterward, Maribel folded a star more carefully than the rest. She held it up, studying it, then placed it directly into Nyla's palm. A gift. That night, Elliot found the shallow bowl moved onto Maribel's nightstand. The wooden box sat beside it, now open. Inside were folded stars, and small pencil marks on the inside edges. Words written where no one else could see them. The silence, he realized, had been speaking all along. The word came out wrong the first time. It cracked in the middle, thin and unsure, like it didn't trust the air yet. Nyla didn't react. She kept folding paper, her hands steady, her eyes lowered, as if nothing extraordinary was happening. Maribel stopped. Her shoulders tensed, breath caught halfway in. Elliot stood frozen in the doorway, every instinct screaming at him to rush forward, to praise, to cry, to make it matter. He did none of it. He stayed still, the way Nyla had shown him, without ever saying so. Maribel tried again. "I forgot how my voice feels." The room seemed to tilt. Nyla nodded once, slow. "That happens," she said gently. "Voices rest when they're tired." Maribel swallowed. "What if it doesn't like me anymore?" Nyla finally looked at her then. "It's yours," she said. "It can't leave." Maribel exhaled, shaky but relieved. She didn't smile. She didn't laugh. But she didn't retreat either. She said the words again, a little stronger this time, like she was teaching herself how to exist out loud. Elliot felt tears gather, hot and uninvited. He covered his mouth with his hand, terrified the sound of his breathing would break the moment. Nyla reached for one of the folded stars and opened it carefully. Inside was a sentence written in uneven pencil. "I miss Mommy when it's quiet." Nyla didn't read it aloud. She placed it back into the star and folded it closed. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Maribel nodded, her eyes glassy but steady. Then she looked toward the doorway, finally noticing her father. "Daddy?" she said, softer than before. Elliot dropped to his knees, the world blurring as he answered, "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." And for the first time in 14 days, Maribel spoke again without fear. Elliot wanted to talk. He wanted to ask questions. What she remembered, how long she'd been thinking, whether it hurt. He wanted to promise things he couldn't guarantee. He wanted to fill the space with words, the way he always had in meetings and interviews and negotiations. Instead, he sat on the floor. Maribel leaned against his side, light as if she were still deciding whether it was safe. Elliot focused on his breathing, matching hers the way Nyla did. He said nothing. Minutes passed. "I don't like when people say Mommy is asleep," Maribel said finally. "It feels like lying." Elliot closed his eyes. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." She nodded, satisfied. "She didn't say goodbye," Maribel added. "I was going to show her my drawing." Elliot's chest tightened. He reached for Maribel's hand, and this time she laced her fingers through his without hesitation. "I should have told her to wait," Maribel whispered. Elliot turned toward her, careful not to startle her. "No," he said, voice steady despite the ache. "That wasn't your job." Maribel studied his face, searching for something. Whatever she found seemed to settle her. That night, Elliot lay awake long after Maribel fell asleep. He realized how often he tried to fix her pain instead of sit with it. How silence had scared him because it left no room for control. From the hallway, Nyla watched the light under Maribel's door. When Elliot stepped out, she spoke softly. "She didn't stop talking because she forgot," Nyla said. "She stopped because she didn't feel safe yet." Elliot nodded, throat tight. "For the first time," he said, "I think I'm learning how to be quiet." Elliot found Nyla in the kitchen long after the house had gone quiet. The lights were low. Rain tapped softly against the windows, steady and patient. Nyla stood at the sink, hands resting on the counter as if she'd forgotten what she came in for. She didn't turn when Elliot entered. She seemed to sense him instead. "You don't have to explain," Elliot said, though the words felt inadequate the moment he spoke them. Nyla exhaled slowly. "I want to," she replied. She told him about her younger sister, Lila. How their mother died suddenly when they were children. How adults filled the house with advice and prayers and forced optimism. How Lila stopped speaking one day and never truly started again. She could make sounds, Nyla said, but words felt dangerous to her. Like if she said the wrong thing, the world would fall apart again. Nyla learned to listen in other ways. She learned that silence could mean anger, fear, guilt, love, all tangled together. She learned not to rush it. "I couldn't save my sister," Nyla said quietly, "but I promised myself I'd recognize the signs if I ever saw them again." Elliot leaned against the counter, the weight of her words settling in his chest. "And you saw them in Maribel?" "Yes," Nyla said. "The way she watched people's mouths. The way she held her breath before any sound. She wasn't broken. She was protecting herself." Elliot stared down at his hands, suddenly aware of how often he'd mistaken silence for absence. "I didn't know how to help her," he admitted. Nyla finally turned to face him. "Most people don't," she said gently. "They're too afraid of the quiet." The truth came in pieces. Nyla hadn't found the job listing by chance. She'd seen Elliot's interview late one night while scrolling aimlessly through channels she didn't care about. She recognized the pause in his voice before he answered the anchor's question. The look of a man used to control, suddenly without it. "That look doesn't fade," Nyla said. "You carry it in your shoulders." Elliot swallowed hard. "I wasn't trying to intrude," Nyla continued, "but I knew a child like that needed time. Not fixing. Not pressure. So you chose us," Elliot said. Nyla nodded. "I hoped you'd let me stay long enough." Elliot thought of the wooden box. The folded stars. The patience. He thought of all the experts who'd walked through his home with answers and left without listening. "I almost sent you away," he said. "I know," Nyla replied, a small smile flickering. "That's usually how it goes." Upstairs, a soft sound drifted down the hall, a voice humming to itself. "Maribel." Elliot closed his eyes, overcome by the weight of it. "Whatever happens next," he said, "thank you." Nyla's expression softened, but there was something else there too, something cautious. "This is only the beginning," she said. "Voices come back before memories settle." And that, Elliot realized, was what scared him most. Maribel began whispering at night. Not loudly. Not to anyone in particular. Elliot heard it once while passing her door, her voice low and careful, as if she were speaking to someone standing just beyond the room. "Mommy," she murmured, "are you mad at me?" Elliot stopped, heart pounding. Later, Nyla explained gently that children often spoke to the people they'd lost when they felt safe enough to remember them fully. It's not pretending, she said. It's connection. Maribel started leaving paper stars on the windowsill. Some mornings she'd move them slightly, convinced they'd been touched overnight. Elliot didn't correct her. He watched her face soften instead. One evening, Maribel told Elliot she believed her mother could still hear her. "Even if I whisper," she said. Elliot nodded, unable to speak around the lump in his throat. For the first time, grief didn't feel like a wall between them. It happened during breakfast. Maribel stared at her cereal for a long time, spoon hovering. Then she said casually, "Mommy looked scared that night." Elliot froze. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" he asked carefully. "She was arguing on the phone," Maribel said. "Before we got home." Elliot felt a chill run through him. He didn't remember that. He'd been distracted, half listening. "She told someone to stop following her," Maribel added, frowning slightly. "I think." The room went very still. Nyla, seated nearby, didn't react outwardly, but Elliot saw her shoulders tense. She met his eyes briefly, just long enough to warn him. "Don't push." Elliot nodded and changed the subject, though his hands shook as he poured coffee. That night, he lay awake replaying the memory. Had there been another car? Had Celeste mentioned something he'd brushed aside? For the first time since the accident, Elliot wondered if the silence had been protecting something else. Elliot didn't go to the police. Not yet. He began quietly reviewing security footage from surrounding streets, old emails, phone records he'd ignored in his grief. He asked no questions aloud, careful not to burden Maribel with his fear. Nyla watched him work from a distance, saying nothing. "You're looking for answers," she said one evening. "I'm looking for the truth," Elliot replied. She nodded. "Just don't let it steal the ground she's standing on." Elliot understood. Whatever had happened that night, Maribel's healing came first. Maribel spoke more freely now, but she still avoided certain details. Nyla explained it gently. "Silence can be a shield," she said. "Sometimes it protects us until we're strong enough." Elliot realized then that Maribel hadn't gone quiet because she was weak. She'd gone quiet because she was overwhelmed. Because adults spoke over her. Because no one asked her what she needed. Because grief moved faster than safety. And now, slowly, she was choosing her words again. The house began to breathe again. Not loudly. Not all at once. But in small, ordinary ways. Music in the afternoons, laughter during meals, quiet conversations that didn't rush toward resolution. Elliot stopped trying to fix everything. He learned to sit. To wait. To listen. Maribel learned that her voice could exist without breaking the world. Nyla remained, steady as ever, reminding them both that healing didn't mean forgetting. On a quiet evening, Maribel stood in the living room without being asked. The windows were open just enough to let in the sound of the city settling down, distant traffic, a passing siren, the hush that came afterward. Elliot was sitting on the couch, half reading, half watching her the way he always did now. "I miss Mommy," Maribel said. Her voice didn't shake this time. Elliot looked up slowly, afraid that reacting too quickly might scare the moment away. He knelt in front of her, bringing himself to her level, the way Nyla had shown him. "Me too," he said. Maribel nodded, satisfied. Not comforted. Not fixed. Just understood. She leaned into him, and Elliot wrapped his arms around her, realizing how much smaller she felt than before. Not weaker, but lighter. Like she wasn't carrying everything alone anymore. Across the room, Nyla watched quietly, hands folded, her presence steady and unobtrusive. This was always her way. She never stepped into moments that belonged to others. Later, after Maribel had gone to bed, Elliot stood by the window, watching rain begin to fall again. The same sound that once marked the worst night of his life now felt different. Softer. Survivable. There were still questions. About the accident. About the memories Maribel was only beginning to trust. About truths that might one day demand answers. But tonight wasn't for that. Tonight was for a voice that had found its way back. And for a family that had learned something money never taught them, that healing doesn't arrive with force or certainty. Sometimes it arrives quietly and waits for you to listen. If this story moved you, take a moment to let us know. Tap like if it touched something personal, subscribe if you want more stories like this, and share in the comments what helped you find your voice again or who listened when you needed it most. Your story matters too.